The story begins in the 2nd January of the year 2020. The boiler in the main character's small apartment stopped working. A guy with dark hair and a blue t-shirt looks at the steam-shrouded pipes, frowning. He thought he must have rented a house where the boiler was already on the verge of breaking down. Slapping his slippers on the floor, an elderly man shouted that young people do not know how to save on heating at all. Waving his broom, he yelled at them to just put on their socks and seal up the windows. The residents looked at him from their apartments. The man shouted that he told them not to load the boiler so much. The main character thought irritably that this old man had previously hinted to him that the boiler would not hold up at some point. He thought that if he went and told him now that the boiler was broken, he would definitely blame it on him, tell him to pay for the repairs, and then raise the rent because he didn't take good care of the house or something. He thought that he would be happy to bury it somewhere in the yard, but there would be problems later. The wind was blowing in the shabby apartment, and cobwebs were visible in the corner. The main character thought that his life since childhood was hard and painful, so an ice shower suits him even more than a hot one. Shivering from the cold, he hugged his hands and sneezed. He thought that this room was rather cold. He thought that maybe the old man's words had brainwashed him because he almost immediately went to buy film to cover the windows. He stood at the entrance to the balcony, shivering from the cold. The main character thought it was called the butterfly effect. A flutter of a wing can cause a hurricane on the other side of the planet. Back then, he didn't know that an ordinary broken boiler would completely change his life. A guy wearing a black hoodie asked a store employee where the film was stored here. The girl replied with a smile that he was to go to the right of a large pillar with the letter F. He walked along the store shelves and thought that they really did have everything. The child, holding a wrench in his hand, asked his father if he would buy him one. The man in the blue shirt asked why he needed a wrench. He told him to put it down. Brandishing a wrench, the child said that it has a very comfortable handle. The protagonist's name was Hwayoon. And according to the owner of the orphanage director, a name given to him by a father he had never met. He thought about how HWA means peaceful and young means reach. Putting his hands in his pockets, he reflected that, for the owner of a name that meant peaceful achievement, he was living the exact opposite life. His parents abandoned him as a child, and the shelter gave him only a roof over his head and food. Two larger boys dressed in white beat up a frightened little boy. Little Hwayoon punches another boy in the face with his fist while the adult tries to hold him down. Hwayoon thought that this place had reinforced his belief that he should become stronger. He decided that money was the main source of power, so all he did was work, even in high school. Unfortunately, with poor educational success and no income, he could not count on anything but part-time work. Hwayoon, dressed in a courier's work clothes, gives the package to the customer. He gives him money in return, and the main character takes it, his eyes narrowing in displeasure. If Hwayoon has learned anything during his career, it's that the price of his time is pennies. He thought of the world as a cruel place. Hwayoon stands in front of a rack with a machete, smiling. He picked up the machete in his hand and thought about how stylish it looked. The girl quietly asked the guy with the cart what was wrong with the main character, and why he was smiling with a machete in his hands. The guy said he didn't know and said he wouldn't go near him. Hwayoon's smile was reflected in the machete blade, and he thought that it brought back memories. When Hwayoon realized that his hard work wasn't worth 10,000 won even if he sold himself into slavery, and that orphans couldn't serve in the military, he became a mercenary and participated in countless wars around the world as a member of the First Squad. The First Squad is an international mercenary band made up of orphans and social outcasts. In other words, those who have nothing to lose. People like Hwayoon were given a bed, clothes, and money for the rest of their lives. He couldn't help but be grateful. They teamed up, getting rid of pirates in the seas and beheading terrorists on land. Sometimes, Hwayoon even participated in international wars to earn his own price. Putting her hands on the machete, the salesgirl said that it was worth 240,000 won. She asked him what he was buying it for. She explained that it was much more suitable for a collection than for logging or camping, and said she could show him more practical machetes. Hwayoon replied that it was fine and it suited him. He had been thinking about buying a new machete for a long time, because it was very blunt and it was enough for him to hold it in his hands to feel its power. The main character pointed his finger at the bubble wrap behind the saleswoman and asked for 10 meters. The girl began to cut off the bubble wrap with a stationary knife. The cut was rough and jagged. Hwayoon thought irritably that this knife was so blunt that she couldn't even cut straight. He told her to stand back. The saleswoman raised her head questioningly. Hwayoon raised the machete and swung it in front of him. She stared at the neatly cut bubble wrap in surprise. The main character turned around when he heard the noise. A crowd of people were bustling around something, saying that it was like someone was real. Someone asked me to take a picture with him. A huge shadow fell over the surprised people. Hwayoon's eyes widened in surprise. A small goblin with a knife jumped at the fleeing people. The fleeing guy looked back in surprise. The goblin leaped towards him with a vicious smile, swinging its knife. Blood gushed out of the guy's body. He fell to the ground dead, and the goblin crouched down in front of him. The main character paled in surprise and thought that he looked like a goblin from a video game. The goblin was devouring the corpse with an evil smile. He turned to Hwayoon with a bloody mouth. The main character recoiled in surprise. The goblin leaped at him, knife in hand. Hwayoon chopped off his head with a swing of the machete. He asked himself what was going on here in the shopping center building. The floor of the trading floor was smeared with blood, and there were bodies and trash everywhere. A scream rang out. Hwayoon was breathing heavily, smeared with green blood. He was holding a machete. Frowning, he thought that the smell of blood was unbearable. When he heard the cry for help, he turned around. There were bloodied bodies on the floor. A few goblins are standing there, smiling maliciously. The woman covers the little girl, and they tremble in fright. She is frightened and asks for help. The main character swung his machete, cutting one of the goblins in half. The woman asked what was going on and where they were coming from. The little girl snuggled up to her chest in fright. The main character looked at them blankly. He looked down at his machete in exasperation and thought that with this blade, it was more of a crushing weapon than a cutting one. He decided that he needed to find something more suitable. His eyes widened in surprise. There was a huge crowd of goblins in front of him. Gritting his teeth and thrusting the machete forward, he thought that they weren't running out. The guys behind nothing let out a battle cry. Several guys are fighting goblins with improvised means. The guy in the black t-shirt hit the goblin's head with an axe. A guy with blue hair and red glasses was sitting in a corner, holding his head in his hands and shaking, begging God to save him. A chainsaw blade appeared in front of his face, and he raised his head. Hwayoon told him that this wasn't a dream, and panicking wouldn't help. He told him to get up if he wanted to leave, and added that prayers would not save him. The main character thought that right now, he just wanted to increase the number of goblins resisting. The four guys took up a fighting stance. The guy in the black t-shirt is armed with an axe, the guy with blonde hair is armed with a nail gun, and the guy with glasses and the main character is armed with chainsaws. The glasses guy turned around when he saw the goblin approaching. He cut his head open with a chainsaw. Hwayoon turned to him and praised him with a smile. The guy looked down in shock, covered in green blood. The main character thought that even if someone is weak in body and spirit, the instinct of self-preservation will give them the strength to survive. The guy in the gray shirt called them to come look at something. The black sphere was wrapped in a bright vortex of blue energy. Shielding his face from the light with his hand, Hwayoon said that he was sure that the monsters were coming from there and they needed to destroy this thing. The guy in the gray shirt asked how they should do it. He said he didn't know, 2 goblins emerged from the portal with vicious smiles. Among the shelves of the store, the bloodied bodies of humans and goblins lie on the floor. Hwayoon and a guy with glasses are hiding behind a display case. The protagonist thought that things were only getting worse, and the number of goblins climbing out of the rift hadn't decreased at all, and the resistance energy was plummeting. No one can even imagine how to get rid of them once and for all. The main character looked out from behind the shelter and thought that their appearance was also inexplicable. The spatial rift that the goblins come out of would have thrown even the most brilliant scientists into disarray. Several goblins devour the corpse of a woman. Hwayoon counted from 5 to 1. The guy with glasses asked what he was talking about. The main character replied that there are 10 goblins in each wave, and there are exactly 10 minutes between each wave. Frowning, he said there were 26 of them now, and in 10 minutes there would be 10 more. The biggest problem is that even if Hwayoon understands the whole situation, he doesn't know how to resolve it. In addition, not everything in the store is a good weapon. Heavy weapons such as axes, crowbars, chainsaws, and sledgehammers will consume too much energy, and yet they can only be used in close combat, face to face with monsters. One wrong step and you can become their food. Many of the people in the store are already dead, and those who fought at full strength look completely exhausted. Gritting his teeth, Hwayoon thought that things would be different if he had a firearm. Someone gave the command, "Fire." There was a flash in the muzzle of the rocket launcher. They noticed the explosion behind them. Several armed soldiers entered the room, and they announced that the counterterrorism task force of the Metropolitan Defense Command was speaking. They said they were under their protection from now on. They told them to help the wounded and move towards them. A tank entered the room. Soldiers are firing automatic weapons. The goblin is shot in the back before it can attack the man with the child in front of it. The shop assistant covered her head with her hands as the shot hit the goblin behind her. Lowering the chainsaw, Hwayoon exhaled. The goblin's corpse fell to the floor in front of him, spilling green blood. The guy with glasses thanked the main character. He said with an awkward smile that his name was Kim Bo-won. The main character indifferently replied that he was tired. He stood up and turned away, telling him to go where he needed to go. He thought that he was tired of weaklings. One of the main lessons he'd learned from his years as a mercenary was that weak people were the heaviest burden. Hwayoon doesn't want to drag around with dead weight, especially when the danger isn't over yet. Kim Bo-won gritted his teeth in fright as he held the chainsaw in his hands. The main character thought that with the arrival of armed soldiers, the need for someone like Kim Bo-won became even less. He walked over to the soldiers who were shooting at the goblins. Gritting his teeth, he cursed. He noticed that the soldiers' breathing was labored and their stance was unstable. He concluded that they were not much better than he was. Goblins rushed forward, dodging bullets. Hwayoon gritted his teeth. He held out his hand to the soldier and told him to give him the machine gun. He said that he was Hwayoon, a member of the force squad. Surprised, the soldier asked me to repeat it. Hwayoon snatched the submachine gun out of the soldier's hands with an indifferent face. Another soldier started swearing, asking how he even let them take his weapons. The main character took aim. The soldiers shouted to detain him. Hwayoon started firing his submachine gun, effectively taking out the goblins. The soldiers looked at him in surprise. One of them asked if he was imagining it. Another said that he was from the force squad. The soldier asked in surprise if he was talking about the most ruthless mercenary group in the world. Hwayoon was firing a submachine gun with an indifferent expression on his face. The shot hit the goblin in front of the boy and girl. A soldier standing behind the main character motioned for the woman with the child to follow him. The shot hit the goblin in the chest. Soldiers help people evacuate in the bloodied shopping malls. The dialogue box says game restarting. Hwayoon looked at the dialogue box in surprise. He clutched his head, closing his eyes. He thought about how incredible things had happened one after another from the moment he entered the shop, but his head only started to ache with the appearance of this window in front of his eyes. The main character thought that he doesn't know what kind of game it is, but the fact that it says reload, not load, confuses him even more. He had never seen such hideous monsters or something like that spatial rift. No one in this hardware store had ever seen anything like it. A monster's arm emerged from the rift. Turning away from the dialogue box, Hwayoon decided that trying to understand what was going on would be stupid. It occurred to him that things had happened since he'd come to this store that couldn't be logically explained. He turned around in surprise when he heard a loud sound. A huge orc emerged from the rift and let out a loud roar. Soldiers fired automatic weapons at him as people hurriedly ran away from the store. The orc covered his face from the bullets with his hand. Bullets bounced off his body. The main character shot at him, gritting his teeth, and shouted that they had no effect on him. The main character and soldiers fire at the orc with machine guns as it slowly approaches them. Someone jumped, swinging an axe. Kim Bolan sliced through the orc's legs with a swing of his axe. Standing behind the fallen orc, she said that the lower half of the orc's body is its weakness, and if you make them lose their balance, it will not be difficult to deal with them. Hwayoon looked at him in surprise as he lowered his weapon. The soldier in the back asked who the guy was. The protagonist was surprised to think that this person was definitely a weakling. Just half an hour ago, he had been cowering in a corner and trembling at the sight of the little goblin, but the one who had just dealt with the orc without any problems seemed to know absolutely everything. Kim Bolan chopped off the orc's head with an axe blow. He dealt with it with confidence and precision. Kim Bolan stands over the dead orc with a calm face. The main character and soldiers are standing in front of a dead orc. Several more orcs emerged from the rift. Kim Bolan calmly turned around. Hwayoon opened his mouth in surprise. A small boy with a wrench in his hand charged, swinging the wrench. The main character realized that this is the same boy who a couple of hours ago begged his father to buy him a wrench. Fighting orcs with only the knowledge of their vulnerabilities is reckless, especially with such a small and fragile body. However, he cuts up orcs as if he has dozens of years of experience. The boy kicked the orc's legs and it fell to the floor. Hwayoon turned around in surprise. The saleswoman was twirling the chain in the air like a professional. He thought about how the employee who cut his bubble wrap was acting the same way and killing orcs left and right, and only a cold calmness could be seen in her eyes. She swung the chain and the orc fell forward, smashing his face into the ground. The man named Kim Bolan who is currently chopping down an orc with an axe is the same guy who fell to his knees and prayed at the sight of a goblin, like this boy who begged his dad like a normal child, like the employee who spoke to him with kindness and gentleness. The main character doesn't understand what's going on here. The soldier ordered a ceasefire. The people behind Hwayoon cheered that their prayers had been answered and they were saved. He wondered what the difference was between those who had changed dramatically and were fighting the orcs and the others, and what was the reason for this transformation. Ding! A system window appeared in front of Hwayoon's face. It says, "There is no training here. However, you can ask 3 questions about the game. Choose your questions wisely." The main character drew attention to the words about training and questions. The mercenary squad stands with weapons in their hands, and in front of them stands Lee Hwayoon with a machete in his hand. Their eyes glow blue. Hwayoon has a nickname that was given to him when he joined the most ruthless mercenary group in the world and fought in countless wars. Fearless, someone who is not afraid of anything. It was invented by foreigners from his squad, as he always kept calm and reasonable, regardless of the situation. Thanks to these traits, he could survive in disorderly battles among numerous shells and debris. The system window says, "The right to ask questions is given to all people selected to become players." Hwayoon once again realized that trying to understand the situation was a stupid idea. Looking at the dialogue box, the main character said that this is no longer funny. He thought that he had no doubt that the writing before his eyes, like everything else that had happened, was real. Dead orcs and goblins lie on the floor, hacked to pieces. Hwayoon asked what was going on here. He said it was his first question. A voice came out of the system window saying that this is the end of the world and a system designed to test humanity, and this is a combination of video game features that people like so much. The main character strictly said to stop talking nonsense. The system window told him to choose his questions wisely, and added that he didn't have to ask them right now. Frowning, Hwayoon thought that this mechanical voice sounded like a woman's, and it annoyed him. He thought that if he could break through monsters with brute force, it wouldn't work here, because he didn't have a physical body and only communicated through text and voice. A voice from the system window told the main character that the status window was available from now on. The system window says that the status window is unlocked. A voice from the system window said that people all over the world were chosen to become players, and he is currently in Korea. The voice asked him to call up the status window. Raising an eyebrow, he was about to say that he didn't care about the status window, but he was interrupted by the status window appearing in front of him. It read that his level 1, endurance, agility, strength, concentration and mana were all 1. Only his bonus points was 3. Achievements and skills were none. Hwayoon chuckled nervously. He thought it was getting more interesting, and the delusional report about video games in the real world turned out to be true. The system window said that this was proof that he had become a player and that there were gates all over the world. The voice said that these gates are connected to dungeons, but the main character interrupted him and asked if he understood correctly that he needed to train to cope with monsters and prevent humanity from dying out. He thought that as soon as the system mentioned video games, the situation became a little clearer, and instead of listening to him talk, he wanted to ask a more important question. The system window told him that he was learning fast. Hwayoon asked why the boy, the employee, and the bespectacled guy had changed so dramatically. The voice replied that it didn't have an answer and suggested that they were just natural players. The main character wanted to say something, but the system window turned red, making an incomprehensible sound, and it said, "Error." Hwayoon looked at the red system window in surprise and asked what was going on. The red system window says, Hwayoon is the only non-regressed player. To keep the balance in the game, this player will receive a unique skill. Search for a unique skill. The main character was surprised to ask about the fact that everyone regressed except him. To regress is to go back from the future to the past. This word is familiar to the main character because he has shouted many times in the middle of a brutal battlefield that he wants to take everything back. Hwayoon is on his knees in the middle of a bloody battlefield littered with corpses, shouting and holding up his palms. He thought that everything was getting clearer now from the message about the game being rebooted to how ordinary people dealt with orcs so easily. He remembered Kim Bo-won taking out an axe from a dead orc, a boy hitting the orc with a wrench, and a shop employee twisting a chain in the air. Hwayoon realized that all the system's nonsense was true, which meant that the report that he was the only player who didn't regress was probably also true. Gritting his teeth, he cursed and asked what the point was. It was at this point that he realized that everyone else had regressed. Looking at the system window, Hwayoon sighed and said that he would ask another question. The system says, search for a unique skill. The woman slapped the main character on the back and asked what he was doing. She told him to go and help the others fight because he was so good at it. Turning to her with a grim expression, he said that when there were monsters in front of her, she was afraid to make a sound, so it was better for her to keep quiet. The woman was frightened. He asked her if she had regressed. She asked in surprise what it was. Hwayoon replied that it means going back to the past from the future. She asked him what he was talking about. The protagonist calmly raised his eyebrows. Thanks to her, he understood something else. After seeing the strange creatures that suddenly appeared in the system messages, he began to realize that only those who became players regressed. As if trying to prove that they are from the future, These players kill orcs by attacking only their weak spots, and Hwayoon is the only one who doesn't know the future. He frowned and pointed, deciding not to jump to conclusions. Kim Bo-won approached him and asked if he could introduce himself again. He said that he was the reason he was able to become a player, and he had been looking for him all his life, from dungeon to dungeon all over Korea, because he needed to meet him. He said with a smile that this day was what changed his life. Hwayoon asked if this was true. Kim Bo-won said that if he hadn't helped him and given him a chainsaw, he would never have become a gambler and would have been hiding in the basement for the rest of his life like everyone else. The protagonist calmly thought that these were definitely the words of a person who had visited the future. Kim Bo-won said with a smile that the only reason he was successful as a player was because Hwayoon was an example to him. The main character asked him if he knew him well. He replied that there wasn't a single player in Korea who didn't know him, because he was the player who entered the last dungeon. Hwayoon was surprised. He thought that as soon as he began to understand the situation a little, he was being told another term that he was hearing for the first time in his life. He started to say something, and Kim Bo-won enthusiastically said that he was listening to him. Many admiring people gathered around him. The shop employee put her hand on her chest and said that it was a great honor to meet the player who entered the last dungeon, and she didn't know it back then. She said that she couldn't believe that the person she fought hand in hand with in the beginning was Hwayoon. A boy with a wrench in his hand said that he would remember until the day he died how he entered the final dungeon, giving the middle finger to all the reporters. The protagonist thought about how all these people were fighting orcs. In other words, they are all regressed players. Kim Bo-won asked the main character to talk about what happened in the last dungeon. Hwayoon noticed that they were always talking about a place called the last dungeon. A system window appeared in front of his face. The system window says, "Search for a unique skill completed. Please check the status window." The next system window says, "Butterfly effect, first level. As the only one who has not regressed, you will earn extra points for each action you take that changes the future." Hwayoon's eyes widened in surprise. He understands perfectly well what the butterfly effect is. He thought that the flutter of a butterfly's wing might cause a hurricane on the other side of the planet. Looking at the system window, Hwayoon thought about the extra points. A loud sound rang out, and everyone turned in the direction of the sound. Several orcs emerged from the rift. The regressors ran to attack. Hwayoon with a calm face began to shoot from the machine gun and thought that just now the orcs had come running. Apart from the status window, after becoming a player, Hwayoon started to see the name and level of the monster above his head. On the system window above the orc was written, "Orc, second level." 2 shots hit the orc's head, pushing it back. The orc growled angrily, its eyes glowing red. Hwayoon thought about the fact that bullets do almost no damage to orcs, and firearms cannot penetrate their thick skin. Weapons that are not designed for combat only work against orcs because they are used by regressors. The regressors and orcs launched an attack on each other. Hwayoon thought about how they had a clear understanding of the orcs' weaknesses, and they were aiming for the areas that weren't as strong as the rest of their bodies. The store employee threw the chain forward, wrapping it around the orc's leg. Hwayoon does not shoot at orcs because the size of the bullets is smaller in relation to the size of these orcs. Kim Bo-won will hit the orc in the leg with an axe. Even if the bullet did hit the orc's ligaments, the damage it would simply not be enough to disarm them. Hwayoon handed the machine gun to the soldier. As he picked up the chainsaw from the floor, he thought that the power of regression was truly amazing. Looking ahead, he saw an axe. He raised the axe. The system window says, "Special skill butterfly effect activated. You changed the future, plus 1 extra point." Hwayoon asked in surprise if he had changed the future. He laid the axe on the floor and picked up the drill. A system window appeared in front of him, which says, "Special skill butterfly effect activated. You changed the future, plus 1 extra point." The orc charged at him from behind. Hwayoon abruptly threw the axe at him. The axe struck the orc in the knee. It clattered to the floor. Hwayoon ran up to him and swung the axe. With a blow of his axe, he chopped off the orc's head. The system says, special skill butterfly effect activated. You changed the future, +1 extra point. While claiming it, Hwayoon asked Kim Bo-won if he had used an axe last time. He replied that he used a chainsaw. With a slight smile, Hwayoon thought that he understood now. If he does something that he didn't do in the past, it is considered a change in the future. He's not entirely sure, but it all seems to fit. What he is doing now must be the opposite of what he did in his previous life. Kim Bo-won told him that he had single-handedly killed 3 orcs in the past. The main character asked how. Kim Bo-won pointed to the side. There were buckets of thinners on the shelves, a substance that helps make solidified paint runny again, and it also ignites very well. Grinning, Hwayoon said it was interesting. Looking at the buckets of thinner, he thought that he had the same idea as before to set the orcs on fire with thinner. This means that if Hwayoon kills the orcs without using thinner, the future will be different. Or, for example, he can use it to kill all of them or not kill any of them. He took 1 bucket from the shelf. The system window says, special skill butterfly effect activated. You changed the future, +1 extra point. Exhausted players agreed to participate in Hwayoon's plan. They immobilized the orcs by destroying their Achilles tendons or knee joints, after which he poured thinner on them and then set them on fire. The system window says, unique skill butterfly effect activated. Ding, you changed the future, +1 extra point and level up 3 extra points. Hwayoon stands surrounded by flames. He thought that now he was convinced. If he does the opposite of what he did in the past, he will get extra points. He thought he didn't know what they were for, but that wasn't new. He thought that even without allocating points to his stats, he could chop off orcs' heads without any problems. The system window notified him of a Brave Newbie achievement received. This achievement is given to players who complete the hunt without spending extra points. For getting this achievement, you will receive a skill. Armor, first level, strengthens the player's defense. The strength of the armor is proportional to the strength characteristic of the player. Hwayoon raised his eyebrows in surprise as he looked at the system window. Blue energy enveloped him. His hands turned black. Looking down at his hands, he asked what they were. The guy gritted his teeth, cursed softly, and said that he thought he was going to get this skill this time. The girl with the metal pipe frowned and quietly asked when he even managed to get it. Turning to them, Hwayoon asked what was wrong and if it was a problem that he got this skill. The guy and the girl were scared. The girl frowned and said that it was a problem because he was using it to crush the whole of Korea. The guy gritted his teeth and said he couldn't believe he'd missed out on getting it. Calmly raising his eyebrows, Hwayoon thought that it must have been his skill in the past, at least judging from the fact that the butterfly effect wasn't activated. The future only changes if he does something new, but the skill didn't activate when he got Brave Newbie and armor. The rift began to glow with purple energy. Kim Bo-won, who was standing behind Hwayoon, was looking at him with a cold gaze. Now the players are planning to go inside the gate, coming to the dungeon after leaping the dimensional barrier. The dungeon is called Goblin and Orc Dungeon. Well, this game was definitely created to annihilate the human race in mind. There's a fixed number of monsters in each dungeon, and after a certain period of time, the monsters in the dungeon will come out and destroy everything. And there's only one way to destroy a gate. Players have to kill all the monsters inside the dungeon as quickly as possible. The maximum number of players that can enter is stated in the dungeon information, and the dungeon difficulty is also important, as it determines the rarity of the skills and items that can be dropped. So this dungeon, which has D- difficulty, means it's a dungeon with no drops above rare grade. Even so, Hwayoon still has a reason to enter this dungeon. He wants to do an experiment to test out the stats he gained as a player and newly acquired armor skill. As he is at a disadvantage for the information about this new world, he needs power that he can immediately see. After all, strength is actual power, because he wanted to see how his new armor skill would give toughness in proportion to the player's strength. He applied all the bonus points from the butterfly effect to strength. He has already defeated countless goblins, and knows the weakness of the orcs, so he needs to be prepared for unknown dangers. That is why he chose this dungeon as his first hunting ground. As he entered the dungeon, he was greeted with a sinister smile from the goblin. They attacked him almost instantly, yet the goblin won't have the slightest chance to damage our protagonist. As Hwayoon's armor activated, he was tough as a rock. He grabbed the goblin's head, then crushed it with just his grip. The other players almost died from a heart attack. How ridiculous for a new player to have that crazy amount of power. Well, Hwayoon looks at his status window. It hasn't been 5 hours since the game began. But his strength is already 16. Kim Bo-won come to ask him, how can the armor skill be this strong? Is the skill the only one of its kind in the world? Probably because of the skill, he was considered the strongest player in Korea in his previous life. But Hwayoon wasn't interested. Kim Bo-won coldly mumbled he would take the skill. He took the chainsaw from the other player, using it and aiming at Hwayoon. Hwayoon didn't have time to panic and activated his armor skill. Thankfully, the chainsaw is inefficient to damage him. Hwayoon thought that even if he didn't regress, this is not right to attack somebody because of jealousy. He smiled because it was his turn to dish back what Kim Bo-won wanted to do. He grabbed the chainsaw and destroyed it effortlessly by bending the blade. Hwayoon strangled Kim Bo-won without any emotion because he thought that at the end of every greed lies destruction. He learned that on the battlefield and has always remember it. He warned the other players that they would be the same as this greedy Kim Bo-won if they dared to touch him in the future. So in the end, he cracked Kim Bo-won's neck, without the slightest regret in his eyes. Hwayoon thought that on the battlefield, what he received in return for releasing the enemies was not gratitude, but more bullets. That's how it always was. Therefore, he should never let emotions get in the way when dealing with an enemy who once threatened his life. The law is meaningless now that the game has started. So he gave the rest of the players there an ultimatum: get lost if you don't want to die.